All right, welcome, Joetta.
Hey, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Sorry we can't do this in person, but I'm getting used to these Zoom meetings, as I'm sure y'all all are. Um, I am Joetta White. I work with UT TSU Extension with the AgrAbility program. And if the cicadas in the background get too loud, let me know because I can put my headset on. Um, and you might hear a truck or tractor come by, but I'm kind of in, this is my setting since March. Uh, I started out as a 4-H agent in Gibson County, and in 1997, I started with the AgrAbility program. This program works with farmers, agriculture producers, employees, farm family members who might have a physical challenge due to an accident or illness, and it does not have to be farm related. And what we are um, try to do, hold on just a minute. What we try to do is work with them on ideas for modifying their equipment, uh, their shop area, their home, so that they can continue to farm with their physical challenge. The AgrAbility program is in 21 states. It is a program through the USDA Farm Bill. So I think the Farm Bill is very important because it keeps me employed, for among other reasons. But it's a 4-year grant, so every 4 years we have to apply, send in a proposal, and to get refunded. Now, you're not automatically refunded. You're competing against other states, new states that have not had the AgrAbility program before, and states that have had it for years. So we are in competition in order to keep our grant. Luckily, Tennessee began the AgrAbility program in 1984. So we have kept it continuously since 1984. It became statewide in 1997 whenever I started. So we fill out a proposal, we turn that in. There is a group of a peer review that goes over each proposal, and they rank the proposals, you know, from best, from greatest to least. And like I said, there's, they only each year, every 4 years, they only have a certain amount that can be funded for that year. So every state is on a different, not every state, but like we are not on the same time schedule as maybe, let's say, Alaska. So their 4 years may be different. So that is how the AgrAbility program works. Like I said, it's in 21 states. Last year, we were able to introduce, no, 2 years ago, we were able to introduce, and Tennessee helped them get this, was Alaska. So we are glad to say that we were helpful in helping them fill out their proposal. They were our partners for a few years just to see if they wanted the AgrAbility program. A couple of our team members went up to Alaska and worked with the AgrAbility staff there, and we were lucky to say that Alaska received the AgrAbility program 2 years ago. We are statewide. I have a coworker in East Tennessee. She covers the eastern region plus half of the middle, and then I cover the western region. and the other half. We have a part-time person with TSU. He's about 20%, and he wears lots of hats, but he works with us on a program that's called the New Farmer, Tennessee New Farmer Academy, where they people who want to learn more about agriculture from beginning to end, to see what all it takes. It goes from the equipment to all the way up to financing. So they learn all about that. So he is in charge of that program. And another program that AgrAbility is involved in is we are involved with the Farmer Veteran Coalition. Tennessee was just last couple of months ago, Tennessee was privileged to have organized a Farmer Veteran Coalition of Tennessee. And it's a statewide program, and it helps veterans who have just either have come out of the service and they want to get into agriculture, or they have been in agriculture and for several years, and they have also served in the military. So we work closely with veterans as well. You may wonder why I like to talk to OT students, and it's because how I get my customers, and Eileen as well, is word of mouth. And I know a lot of our customers are working with occupational therapists and physical therapists. And we are an organization that can network together so that after you can learn from us what farmers go through, what kind of jobs that they do on the farm, such as lifting hay bales or carrying 5-gallon buckets or getting up into and out of their tractor or combine. Even working with livestock, how they're given their injections that could interfere with their rehab, and that can interfere with their work. So that's the reason that I like to talk to OT students, so that we can kind of get a background and a networking going, so that whenever you get out into the workforce, that you can remember, hopefully, that there is a program out there that will help, hopefully, some of your customers that you might have. I do a lot of safety programs as well for youth and adults. We want to try to prevent accidents from happening on the farm, and especially secondary accidents after they have an accident or illness that might limit their farming. We don't want them to have that secondary injury. So we work with them on ideas on how to prevent that from happening. Okay, I know this is quick. Usually I don't run through it this fast, but you've already seen the video. We are working on, that is just part of our new Tennessee video that we are doing with some of our customers. We're working on, we have one more farmer to do and then edit it. And that's going to be what we're going to be able to show, and have that available for organizations and agencies like you to show others about the AgrAbility program. when we're finished, Milan No-Till Field Day is going virtual this year. And Shelby, you're shaking your head. You must know about that. Okay, and Tennessee AgrAbility is a part of that. We are going to be a tour this year on that, and I will send that link out to y'all, so that if you want to register to watch, learn more about the AgrAbility program and the different tours that we have featured. We have, of course, we're going to be talking about AgrAbility. We're going to have some safety videos on there. We have one that's on gardening, and then we have one on the Farmer Veteran Coalition of Tennessee. So I will send that out so that if you want to register for that, and you'll be able to look at it at any time. It starts on July the 23rd. So that might be something that'll give you an idea, an additional idea of what's going on the farm as well, because also we're going to have cattle handling. So that'll just give you some hands-on, virtual hands-on learning about different aspects of the farm. Okay, does anyone have any questions right now?
I've got a couple, Joetta. One, would you talk about what types of diagnoses that AgrAbility tends to, people with what kind of diagnoses that AgrAbility tends to support?
Yes. A lot of my customers have to deal with mobility, getting around their farm, you know, checking cattle, checking fences, checking their crops. So mobility is one of the issues. Knee and hip pain, the replacements. 3 years ago in September, I had knee replacement, and I still help on our family farm. And I waited, it was about a month and a half after my surgery. And I was ready to get back out on the tractor, and so I did. And I also wanted to get back to see what my customers were having to go through after surgery. And so I was able to start disking and getting our winter wheat sown. And so that gave me an idea of what they had to go through in order to get in and out of the tractor. And if you're familiar with tractors, and if you're not, you know, you can go by and go by a equipment place, and you can measure how high that first step is from the ground to that first step. And it's way up there. And that's on tractors, and combines is even higher. So getting a step that is lower to the ground with a handrail helps tremendously with someone who might have mobility problems, someone who might have knee and hip pain. I have a farmer that I'm working with right now that has some back problems, and also has neuropathy in his, and so we are going to be able to put a lower step on his tractor with a handrail to help give him balance as well. And also looking into putting in a new ergonomic seat that will help cushion to help with his back. As you saw in the video, we had a farmer in Gibson County, and he has a blackberry farm. And so having a pruner, as you saw, he also has Parkinson's. And, and so the type of pruner that we were able to help him with helps him in the long run with pruning his blackberry bushes. I want to talk a little bit about the funding for these modifications. Through our grant, we are not able to use any grant monies to help our customers. The monies from our grant helps to house the two full-time staff members in Tennessee. So we have to go out and look at different agencies, organizations who might be able to help offset some of the costs so the farmer and the family they do not have to carry the whole load of these modifications if it's where they're not able to. So some of our farmers, we refer to vocational rehabilitation services. Has anyone heard of those VR before? Okay, this is a state-funded program, and it helps with those who have disabilities. And there's money out there to help with these modifications. Of course, like I said, it is a state-funded, so it takes a while to get. Sometimes it takes a while to even get in the front door, but to find out if they're eligible, and they have to go through all their finances, and sometimes farmers aren't always just ready to hand out, you know, that financial sheet. And then it takes a while for them to get eligible, and the VR counselors have to learn what all the assistive technology devices are that we are recommending. So that's one agency that we go through. We also go through a lot of county organizations, such as civic organizations or even ag businesses, especially where the farmer does business. We ask that business, say if they want to donate to the AgrAbility program, and their monies is going to go help this customer. And they are just giving back to their customer because they've been in business with them for so long. So they're usually very good about helping out in that aspect. Young Farmers and Ranchers Organization, Tennessee Farm Bureau, Farmers Co-op, you know, they're really good about giving back to their community. Stephanie, did I answer what you needed?
Yes, thank you. I think,
Okay.
you know, we're in this class, we're studying neurological diagnoses. And so that's what I was wanting to tie back to. And I think people are picking up on that. And you mentioned Parkinson's and some other things like that. I know I first found out about AgrAbility, I think, wasn't it like 6 years ago, maybe. It was at an AOTA conference, and there happened to be a booth. It was the one in Nashville. And,
right.
And so I always like to look at the modified vehicles, and I was in that area, and I noticed that there was a tractor there, and I sort of was raised in a farming community, and had an interest in that. So I started talking to the people that were there and found out about it. And then I got in touch with you and learned more about it. So, I mean, there were, I think, a number of things that I didn't realize initially. One being that the money isn't used to buy the equipment for the farmers, though you all do help to find the funding for that when needed. Another one was that it isn't just for big time farmers that, you know, really have lots of acreage and lots of equipment. It can be even for what we think of as backyard farmers or almost gardeners. You mentioned something to do with that too, right?
Yes, it doesn't matter. You know, it can be from an acre to thousands of acres that we work with, and like even gardening. A lot of our gardeners go to farmers markets and sell their produce there, or even if they just keep all their produce at home, they're still giving back to the community. Um, in any aspect. So we work with them. Like I said, it can be an acre to thousands of acres. They can be, there's not an age limit to what that we work with, because farmers never give up. They, in some aspect, they are working until it's their last day, and getting them to even say that they have a problem is hard, because they are very stubborn and hard-headed. And I come from a farming family, and so it's like, well, they'll say, I used to, whenever I started using, I would say, I work with farmers with disabilities. And that just kind of turns, your audience off, because when I know there's not big disabilities or small disabilities, but when they think of a disability, they think of someone with a spinal cord injury or an amputee, something like that. They do not think that they have a disability if they have arthritis or if they have a hearing problem.
Yeah, they picture somebody probably in a wheelchair in a nursing
Yeah,
home, something like that, which is, nothing like they picture themselves.
no, that's right. That's right. So I've kind of started using physical challenge, uh, and that's been a little bit more receptive,
Yeah, I could
using
see that.
that instead of just come right out and saying disability. Uh, and then it gets them to thinking, yeah, I've got that, or my hands swell when I'm using a certain, uh, certain piece of tool equipment, hand tool or something like that. Um, and by the way, my hands swell as well, and I have learned that these anti-vibration gloves are wonderful. uh, So whenever you're using, like I use mine for a reciprocating saw, or even whenever I'm using the weed eater or on my push mower, it's simple things like that,
Yeah.
and that they don't even, that don't even think about. Um,
Yeah, I think, farmers as a whole, whether they're men or women, young, old, anything, are pretty tough, pretty hardy, and used to working when they don't feel good, or, they're having some arthritis pain, or just a bad day, or it's really hot or really whatever outside, and they are used to working long days. and
yes,
and so it really is kind of a tough crowd in a lot of ways. So I think that's why it helps to have AgrAbility as sort of a liaison between the rehab specialist and really the rehab services provider, like an OT, and the customer or client, because you guys know farming, you live it as well, and you have the in with that customer base. So it's good to put our expertise together for that. Another thing I didn't know at first or didn't realize about AgrAbility is that, well, I mean, it makes sense that if there's somebody who's been in farming and they start having problems like knee pain or back pain, or get a Parkinson's diagnosis, something like that, it makes sense that they would be matched with AgrAbility. But what I didn't realize is sometimes there are people that don't come from a farming background. They've never farmed. Maybe they've never even planted, had a tomato plant in their yard. but then they have an injury and they can't do the same job they've been doing. So then they come to farming as a
Right.
second career. Would you talk about that some?
Yes, and we see a lot of that with our veterans, um, where they get out of the service and they don't know what direction to go in, what they want to do. And so they are learning about agriculture, even if we help them start with just a small poultry farm, raising poultries, raising chickens, um, and then looking into growing, getting bigger on some aspect in another part of agriculture that they're interested in. It's good therapy as well, even with gardening. Um, it helps with the mental aspect. Um, Farming is very stressful. Uh, Financially, it can be stressful. Uh, you're you're at the uh, you're always looking at the weather constantly uh, to see what it's going to do. We were looking at it last Friday and seeing if we could cut hay or not. And my brother said, well, we need some rain, so I'm going to go ahead and cut hay. And the general joke around this community is, well, if the Turbivals are cutting hay, then that means we're going to get some rain. So it's stressful, but it's also um, can be good therapy. And like I said, with the veterans coming out um, of service, retiring, um, this is what we have found that they want to start doing. They may have not even had any farming background, as Stephanie said, and that's where our new Farmer Academy comes in to show them from beginning to end. You know, they may be thinking um, they're wanting to do row crops, raise cotton or beans or corn, and they get into it and they're seeing what all is detailed in that. And so they might be this school that the new Farmers Academy, might make them rethink, and we help them with that. We have a managed specialist that works with them on their farm plan to see what direction they need to go in, and the direction, if we think their direction that uh, they want to go in, we show them the financial part of that to see if they need to continue with it. Um, but like I said, even if they haven't had that background and they have an injury or an illness that they can't do what they're presently doing, well then there's a way to find some type of agricultural work for them to do. And like I said, we with UT, we have managed specialists that's all that they do is the financial part, and they help you see, uh, if this is the route you need to take, or let's look at a different route. Um, so we don't show them always the sunny side of everything. We show them, the rainy side as well, because we want them to see everything.
Another thing that I know about farmers from growing up in that community is that they're very innovative. And so I would imagine that, you mentioned safety, but I would imagine that you see a lot of what we might call MacGyvering out there. If somebody has had, say, chronic knee pain, I know of a case that came from a farming equipment salesman that told me this a few years back, that he had combine for sale, and somebody came up there. It was an older lady, probably 60 or 70 years old, and She had, I guess, her adult son and then her teenage grandson with her, and they were looking together at combines. And he said originally he thought that she was just the one that was going to write the check, and that's why they brought her along. And part of that was true. She was the one writing the check, but she wanted to get up in there and test drive it before they made the decision. And she, you could tell she had really bad knees, like she was kind of hobbling along just as she walked on flat surface. And the whole time the salesman was talking to her, he was thinking, how is she going to get in that thing? It's 6 feet off the ground. And he was thinking how he could nicely say, well, I don't know if we're really ready for you to get up. But before he could, the grandson made like a stirrup with his hands, and the grandmother put her foot in it and he boosted her up. And it was like happened in 1 second. And it was like that was their system. So it was it wasn't the safest thing, but it worked for them.
No, that's true. Just to tell you a story about a farmer that I worked with. It was harvest season, and he had a motorcycle wreck, and he broke his leg. And usually, I don't want to do any modifications or anything until they have been healed and released from the doctor and everything. But again, he was a row crop farmer. I knew just from talking to him and visiting with him on the farm that he was going to get in that combine one way or the other. And the way that he was mentioning getting into the combine is he was going to get into the tractor loader, and somebody was going to lift him up into the combine, and he was going to get into the seat that way. Well, I'm not going to lie. I've been in that tractor loader before, and I've been lifted up and everything. But I sure wouldn't want to do it if I had a broke leg too. But I knew he was going to, so I had plans that could make a makeshift sling lift for a combine. And I gave those to him, and he built it. He and his employees built it, and he was able to get in and out of that combine safely, and he was able to harvest his crops with a broke leg. But he did it safer than the tractor loader. So yes, they're going to find a way, one way or the other, to get their job done. And it might not be the safest, and that's one way that I come in is to say, okay, hey, let's look at something else. Let's look at another way to do this. Let's look at another way that you can carry those 5-pound buckets of feed to get out to your livestock or your horses or something. Let's look at another way that we can use modify these hand tools that's going to be safer for you. And farmers, they wear lots of hats. They're a vet, they're a financial advisor, they are a mechanic, they are a welder, and sometimes all they need is just a little idea, and they can say, hey, I can do this, or we can look at it this way, and go that route. So, but like the examples that Stephanie gave and that I gave, they're bound and determined to get in and out of wherever they need to, or get up on that horse if they need to. So if there's a will, there's a way, and that's our main job. Our mission is to be productive agriculture. We want them to continue with their job, because a lot of times this is all they have done their entire life. and they don't want to do anything else. And if you tell somebody who's been farming, 20, 40, 60 years, say, look, you can't do this anymore. Well, then that gives them additional problems that they have to deal with. Even just as an example, my daddy is 88 years old. He's had 2 knee replacements, 2 shoulder replacements. I tell him he's the bionic man. And back in early March, May, we had hay down, and it was raining day after day, a little shower. And he was bound and determined that he was going to go to the field and get the hay tedded for my brother. And this is a different tractor that we have now, and my brother, we haven't put on that extra step with the handrail, for the reason that Daddy wasn't ready to get back in that tractor. He was having some neck and shoulder problems back in early May, and so my brother wasn't really wanting him on the tractor. And then I was up at the horse barn, and I saw him go down to the tool shed, and he got on the tractor. He had to get off the tractor to go open the gate. And whenever he went to get back on the tractor, he found that he could not. He just physically was not able. And so I saw that he was still down there, and I went and I checked on him, and he said, I just can't get back in that tractor. And so I took over from there. But my brother came back home, got back home, and he said, Joy, Daddy's just not able to do what he wants to do. And I said, I know that, but I didn't know he was going to go get on the tractor. And then a couple of days later, Mike put him on he got on the tractor, my dad, and he was able to ted hay. And that just lifted his spirits. We got him out in the field, got him on the tractor, and whenever he got finished, he was able to get off the tractor at the end of the day. And so that just lifted his spirits. So whenever you tell somebody you can't continue to do what you're doing, that's a mental therapy that's gonna another aspect that you have to deal with. So whenever a farmer has an accident or illness, that they want to find a way to continue what they're doing. And that's what we want to do. That's what we want to do. I have a farmer in Rutherford County, Murfreesboro area, who is a bilateral amputee. He lost his legs in a corn picker. And he's a livestock farmer. And it was back in the 80s whenever he had his accident. And he still continues to farm. We have been able to put lifts on his tractors so that he can easily access those. He is in his late 80s, and he's a remarkable man. He keeps going.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but hearing about those 80-year-olds out there still makes me feel kind of lazy.
I know. But they want to do it.
Yep. And I think that aligns so well with the OT philosophy that we understand and believe that occupation or keeping busy with things that are meaningful to a person is key to satisfaction in life. And
Yes,
for farming, it's a lifestyle, not just a career.
right.
Certainly not just a job. It's a lifestyle for them.
It is. It is. And sometimes they may have to find something else, that they can do on the farm. They might not be able to harvest their crops in the fall to get on that combine, um, or to, vaccinate their cattle. Um, but there, you can find different alternatives for them, uh, to make them feel like they are useful. Make them feel like they are useful and giving back to the community that they've done for so many years.
I have heard of
A lot of times, whenever I am talking to people um, and doing presentations, well, the older farmers, they think that's all that I work with are older farmers, and really it's not. These young farmers are, they're having the same kind of mobility problems. They're getting the back pain and the shoulder pain and the knee pain and the arthritis. So it's just not your, uh, you know, I'm not 60 yet, but uh, it's getting a little closer every year. But your 60, 70, 80-year olds. I mean, there's even some 90-year-olds out there that are still doing some type of farm work. But it's not, like I said, it's just not uh, your older farmers. The younger ones are getting those problems as well.
Well, does anybody else have questions for Joetta, or has she covered what you were hoping to learn? I think the video was really informative, and then of course what you've shared has been really informative. And my main takeaway always is that to know that AgrAbility exists, and whether students end up in the state of Tennessee and they would know, or if they're in West Tennessee, they would know to connect with you, or if they're in another part of the state or another part of the country, if you just go on the AgrAbility website, you can figure out, is that right? Like who to contact if it's not going to be you?
Yes, and I just sent that, the AgrAbility for our national website. I just sent that to y'all. Yes, and it lists, it lists all the states that have the AgrAbility program. And if a state does not have an AgrAbility program, you can always contact the national staff, and they will try to help you in some way. We try not to leave anybody out.
Another thing that I think is great about AgrAbility is that they're often free webinars, and there's a lot of times articles coming out, and I'm on an email list that I'm sure I signed up through the website, and I get just interesting stories, and like how did they problem solve through this or that, or what new products are out there, that kind of thing. And I aspire one day to go to an AgrAbility conference, whenever we can start going to conferences in person again. I think that would be a really great thing for OTs to try to do, go to something outside of an OT conference, and an AgrAbility would be right up our alley. Well, Joetta, thank you so much for being here and sharing your expertise with us. I appreciate it and know that the students do too. And definitely, I know that the students will keep this kind of in their back of their heads so that when they do come across clients, which they are sure to, of any age that are in farming or ag or want to be, they will know what to do to bridge that gap.
Yeah, hang on just a second. Let my brother get by. he's just sitting in the truck. I appreciate y'all letting me do this. I wish we could be in person, but as I said earlier, this is our way of life right now. And just to give you
Should we all wave at him?
I know I talk about my family a whole lot, but yeah, I talk about my family a whole lot, but my brother has become one of my customers as well, but he doesn't listen to me. Last fall, his niece started bothering him, and he was harvesting his crops, our crops, and he was getting on and off the combine quite a bit. And his niece started bothering him, and he was asking me, well, did your knee do this? Did your knee do that? Did you have this? And finally, I just got him an appointment with my doctor that orthopedic doctor that I go to, and so he started with the shots and all that, and in December I told him, I said, just go and have the knee replacement now, just go and get it over with, I can take care of everything. And he said, no, I'm going to put it off. Well, he had a surgery to prolong, to get him until this fall. And a couple of weeks ago, he said, you know what, if I had already had my knee replacement back in December, I'd already be out of pain and not, doing things more. And I said, yeah, if you'd have just listened to me. But again, and it was on he said, I really do believe it was because I was getting on and off the combine so much. And like I said, that step is so high off the ground. And I've given another farmer some plans to build a lift for his combine. So the other day I said, well, when are we gonna? Because he said something about making a lift for this fall, and I said, when are we gonna build a lift for the combine? I was so excited because I would have something that I could be able to show, personal experience. He said, oh, I'm going to have surgery in November, so I'm not going to put a lift. I'm just going to teach you how to run the combine. And I said, yeah, right. You won't let me touch that combine. But like I said, farmers are very stubborn. And I know firsthand. I don't want to compare y'all, but I want to tell you, I've talked to TSU OT students about a month ago as well. I talk to them every year, just like I do y'all. And they have, this might be something for the future you want to think about, but they have formed, they have different group projects, project groups. And one of them this year is the AgrAbility one. And they have been, talking to us about things that they could come up with to help our AgrAbility program, and different ideas. So that might be something, in the future that you might want to look at. Like I said, we get our customers word of mouth. It might be anything to have to do with communication, or how to get more customers, how to spread the word, or how to look more in depth into our program to see how OT students or OT programs can work with the AgrAbility program. So I just thought I would throw that out, maybe something for the future. If y'all, I don't know if y'all have project groups or anything like that. But they asked, there was a group of, I think it was about 5 or 6 girls, and they asked if they could work with us and just see more in depth of what we do and if there was anything that they might be able to do for our program.
I think that's great information, and I hope they will present at the state conference, or share what they find out with the rest of the OT community for sure.
Yeah.
There are sometimes opportunities in our program to do things like that, so we'll definitely keep that in mind. That would be a great one for sure.
It is. And our national conference got postponed. It was supposed to have been in March. It's postponed till late November, and it's still iffy. We don't even know if we're going to have it or not. But you can go on to, as Stephanie said, the AgrAbility website, and there are webinars on there, lots of webinars that you can view. And usually every January, they have set aside virtual trainings, webinars that last, there's 2 webinars a day for 3 or 4 days with different subjects. And so you can keep up on the AgrAbility website as well as to when those will be. But our webinars are archived, so you can go and look through the subjects and see there might be something of interest there for you.
It's really nice to have those as free resources. And for students, I'll say that's one way you can kind of distinguish yourself from other applicants for a certain job. If you are moving into a community or living in a community where there's a lot of farming, or just in general, if you're going to work with especially the aging population or veterans, it's something you could beef up your resume with for sure. And
Right.
it's right there on the website, so you can do it at your own time frame, and it doesn't cost anything. So that's very nice.
It is.
Well, thank you again for being here, Joetta. I appreciate it as always.
Well, I have enjoyed it and love to see all these faces and see what everybody's background looks like.
That's right, right.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Please, feel free to contact me at any time if you have questions, if you have some ideas, if you want to know more about our program. I'd be glad for you to contact me at any time.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope y'all have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so let's get started again. And the first thing I want to do in this session is to correct what went wrong with our assigning of people to the media materials for the media project. And I think what happened is that when there had been a certain period of time, like more than 10 minutes or something like that, between the time people clicked on the wheel, that it reset, because normally it's set up to discard things as their choices as you go through it. So hopefully it'll work today. So I'm just going to call out in alphabetical order people's names, and then I'll spin the wheel. And so when I call your name, you'll see what material you get. Don't worry about the Google Doc. I'll redo that list and then fill in the names and the materials according to your case study, and I'll post that. So you don't have to do anything for that. I'll post it and I'll send an announcement out when it's ready. And for now, we're just going to kind of go through the list and you'll see what material you get. So this will be for Eliza. Eliza gets the Sriracha bottle. This is for Allison Brewer. Newspaper. This is for Liz. Manila folder. The next one is for Lauren. Index cards. Amy Carver. Cereal box. Lucy. Plastic milk jug. Kylie. Chopsticks. Ted. Clothespins. Joe. Egg carton. Megan Henley. Strawberry basket. Lindy. Golf tees. Sydney. Empty pill bottle or a spice container. You can choose. Molly. Ice cube tray. Alex. Oh, it's not throwing them out. Okay. We're going to keep going until we get something that, a Parmesan cheese container. Kyla. Zip ties. Molly Grace. Buttons. Carolyn. Laundry detergent container. Sam. Yarn. Libby. Popsicle sticks. Carly. Pool noodle. Brittany. Coffee can. Kayla. Chopsticks. Amanda. We're getting to a bunch that we've already had. Have we had egg carton, y'all? Okay, egg carton for Amanda. Allie. Toilet paper roll.
Had egg carton.
We did have it. Okay, so disregard that. Let me fix the wheel and I will just kind of do this on after class, and then I will post later today what everybody's assigned to. I know that's not quite as much fun, but that way it will be correct, because everyone's going to have an original piece of material, or material that you will use. If you have trouble locating these, let me know. I don't want you to have to buy anything. Like if you don't use Sriracha, put that out in your group me, and I bet you somebody in the class does. But if not, let me know and I'll hunt something down and we can do a porch drop off or something like that. Again, I don't want you to have to buy anything. If you do buy stuff for this project, please just keep it to a few dollars. I don't want people spending a bunch of money on this, because really the point is to construct something out of very minimal materials. And so what you are constructing, you're going to use the case study that you're assigned to, and each case study will have 4 or 5 students assigned to it, but each of those people will have a different material. And so you'll, according to your case study, you will then decide and figure out, do you want to design a piece of adaptive equipment, something that will help that person with their ADLs or IADLs or their leisure activities or any occupation? Or do you want to use it to come up with some kind of therapeutic activity? So this relates back to using an occupation as the means or the end. The one rule with this, well, 2 rules. One is don't use the material in the way that it is originally intended. So if you, for example, got a toothbrush, don't have your activity be that the person's going to use it to brush their teeth. The second thing is that I want you to be original. So please don't just go on Pinterest and find something that you copy. If you can go on Pinterest, OTs do that all the time, but because you're matching it up with this particular client, you're going to customize it in some way. There's going to be some kind of a personal, innovative touch that you're going to put on your project. And then we will all share those for the assignment. It tells you more about that in the folder. Any questions about that, you guys, at this point?
Oh, yes. I was gonna say, well, some people spun before, but then you wanted to disregard that. So like, I think the Google Doc's a little off.
Yes.
Um,
It definitely is. Yeah. I will fix that and post it. So for right now, you guys don't pay attention to any of that, but by the end of today or first thing
okay.
tomorrow, I'll have what it really is going to be, and I'll post it and send an announcement.
Okay, cool. Because I was gonna say some people at the end of the alphabet had spun it, but okay, so you'll just post the document we're gonna go by. So disregard everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That
Okay.
will avoid any confusion. I almost said.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. So let's get into today's. I'm shrinking everything I don't need. Let's get into today's topic. I want to make sure I'm sharing the right thing here. So we are, I've lost where I'm trying to share. There we go. Okay, we're starting back where we ended off with the last session that you guys did. So if you're looking at the slides, we're on slide number 12. Today we're going to talk about, we're still talking about acquired brain injury, but instead of traumatic brain injury, we're going to talk about non-traumatic brain injury, which is the second of those two categories under ABI. Before we go to that, though, I want to ask you guys a question. Do you have thoughts on why the demographics for traumatic brain injury are the way that they are? We know that very young children, so under the age of 4, teenagers, and then adults 65 and over are in a higher risk category for traumatic brain injuries. And across all ages, more males than females have traumatic brain injuries. Anybody want to speculate as to why those things are true?
I would say, well, the teenagers stuck out to me because it's 15 to 19, so it's like new drivers.
Yes.
And so since like the motor vehicle accidents is like a leading cause, that would be why. And then like males, not to sound like I guess sexist, but like, well, they have a later development, so like their prefrontal lobe. So like just like I just think like they could be kind of more daring, like more adventuresome, and also like more active in the military. As far as like, so for the blasts or yeah. That's a good point. In the note or in the chat, Joe said age 15. He said is the 15 and 19 age range not due to sports also, which is probably a good point.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's true. We know those teens, that is right there at that driving age, and also kind of the age when people are becoming more independent. So they're not under their parents or even any adult supervision as much. So you'll see them doing things like, when I was a teenager, there was this place where people could go to that was on the river, and people would climb up on this kind of water tower and jump off of it into the river, and dangerous stuff like that. But adults didn't know about it, so that nobody stopped the teenagers from doing it. And there was sometimes some drinking and some drug use there, and that makes you not as careful and more susceptible to that. So what about little kids? There we go from Claire. Let's see. More kids fall from heights, especially when they're learning to walk. Yes, that's true. Little kids fall a lot. I have a cousin with a 2-year-old and a little boy. She has 2 older daughters, and they didn't and don't really fall that much. But all of a sudden, her little boy he's constantly has bruises on his head and all. And every time I go over there, and she'll always say, don't think I'm beating him. He just falls down a lot. And I believe that because I see him do it. He, does things like he'll get 5 stairs from the bottom and then decide it's a great idea to jump. And when I say, why did you just do that? He can't really explain it. So, yes, they are, even little boys sometimes are more daring than little girls in general. And yes, shaken baby syndrome. And so we're looking at that diffuse axonal injury. That is a traumatic brain injury there. And we could probably guess for the older crowd, it is the falls that happen more often. They're having balance problems. Even some of the stuff that relates back to what Joetta said about farming, they tend to, do things that are maybe a little bit outside of what they should be doing physically sometimes, the older crowd, and they fall more often. And then that's going to up your odds for hitting your head. The number one room in the home for falls is the bathroom, because there are slippery surfaces there, and people are, often don't have clothes on, so they're not wearing shoes, and their feet might be wet, and they're bending over to dry themselves or to get something out of a bottom drawer, and just lots of slips and falls happen in the bathroom. Yes, that is true, Eliza, that when they are very little, that babies, Fontenelle, so if you've ever heard somebody say babies have a soft spot on the top of their head, and what that is the fissures in their skull. If you look at this model of the brain, this doesn't show the skull, but you can kind of see where the where the fissures might be. Those haven't fully closed. And the reason for that is there's rapid brain growth going on. So nature wanted to leave some room so the skull can grow with the brain, and then later it fuses. So there's an opening there where there is a greater chance for even just a bump to the head causing an actual traumatic brain injury. Yes, those are good reasons. Okay, so let's go forward and talk about non-traumatic brain injuries. And you can see there that the three of the big types are a cerebrovascular accident, which is the medical term for stroke, tumors, and that's whether they're cancerous or non-cancerous, so malignant or benign. And that also includes tumors and cancers that are either primary, meaning they originate in the brain, that's brain cancer, and there are many different kinds of brain cancers. And it also includes secondary brain cancer. So that would be something that started in another part of your body and then metastasized or spread to the brain. So that happens in things like breast cancer and things that are more commonly diagnosed than primary brain cancer. And then the third category under non-TBI is infection. Meningitis and encephalitis are the two most common infections, and we'll talk about what those things look like clinically. All right. Another thing that is in this category, the non-traumatic brain injury category, is a brain aneurysm. Now, when you're talking about those, make sure you say brain before the word aneurysm, because an aneurysm can happen throughout the body, really. An aneurysm is just an abnormal bulge of the vessels in whatever part of the body. And so if you think about it, think about like if you have a garden hose and water's not coming out, it's somewhere along the way there's a blockage in it, or there's just a great force of water somewhere that's causing a bulge. You know that in that area where the bulge is happening, the walls are thinned and they're at much greater risk for it to pop right there. That actually happened in my garden hose last week. It wasn't because there was a bulge. It was because for some reason one section was in the sun more often, and it deteriorated the outside walls of it. So all of a sudden it just burst in this one part, and it reminded me of an aneurysm. So you can have aneurysms in the brain. Now, the clinical term for that, or more specific term, is a cerebral or an intracranial aneurysm, meaning in the brain. And so what happens with that is that stroke-like damage, that's a bleed in the brain, and that ends up being just like a stroke. So brain aneurysm is in there. I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. When you do have some kind of a brain tumor, whether it's benign or cancerous, whether it's primary or secondary, when you have that brain tumor, you know, it's causing displacement of the brain tissue. So here's the brain. If I put something in it right here, you see how those parts of the brain are shifting. It had to shift so that my finger could get in that place. If this is a tumor, parts of the brain are shifting. So you could kind of see how that happened. So that causes a disruption in the blood flow and the synaptic activity in the brain. Now, also when that happens, chemicals in the brain signal that there's something wrong. And what happens is there's a swelling around the tumor. And so that causes another brain injury, or second level of that. The swelling can also come from surgery. So if there is surgery to clip an aneurysm or to remove a brain tumor, then swelling can happen in that area, and that can cause some brain injury too. Another type of brain injury, and we could debate whether this would go in the traumatic or non-traumatic category, and that I don't want to focus on that too much right now, but another type of acquired brain injury is from a loss of oxygen to a certain area of the brain. And that can be caused by something like a heart attack. So that really is where the non-traumatic aspect of that is coming in. Or it can be caused from something like near drowning. And so if someone is underwater for a long time or long enough where they're can't get oxygen in their lungs, and the oxygen then pumped through their bloodstream to their brain, they can have what's called a hypoxic or an anoxic injury. Hypoxic, hypo meaning below or low, and anoxic meaning the oxygen is cut off. So it either is decreased or cut off. And either way, you end up with brain injury there. If someone hangs themselves, if if there's a suicide, if there is suffocation, even something like carbon monoxide poisoning, those all cause hypoxic or anoxic brain damage. Another type of non-traumatic brain injury is toxic or metabolic injury. So that can be drug or alcohol use. It also could be lead poisoning. This could be, in older homes and buildings, they used to use paint with lead in it. And that hasn't been done for over 50 years now. But if you move into a house that's older, like my house is a couple years short of 100 years old. And so if it had not been repainted and checked for lead paint, you might have some areas of paint that are lead. And what is weird about lead is it's evidently tastes kind of sweet. So if you have like a peeling off or chipping off area of paint, or just a little kid that's teething and walks by and the windowsill is right at their height, and kids will chew on anything. and they could actually get lead poisoning. And it probably wouldn't hurt them if they did that once or twice, but if they live in the house or go there a lot and they're doing it over time, that's when that toxic injury can happen to the brain, causing brain damage. Back to the infection. So I want to clarify that can be a bacterial infection, which would be like meningitis. It could also be, there's also is a viral meningitis. So you could get a virus that affects the brain and causes inflammation or otherwise damage to the brain. And it can be even fungal. So you could get a fungus that is causing damage to the brain. Now, when we think about COVID-19, that actually isn't the evidence that's out there that we know about coronavirus and how it impacts the brain or the central nervous system. It isn't so much that it might cause inflammation, though there is some systemic inflammation that comes from that. It's more that it seems to be a vascular condition in the more serious cases. People are thinking of it like a pulmonary condition, like a cold or a flu. But on autopsy, when they have looked at hundreds of bodies that have died due to COVID-19, what they're finding across the board is that people are often dying as a result of blood clots that are in their lungs or their brain. And so that's the same thing as a stroke. And so you might notice that the case study that we are using for our simulation, that person was hospitalized and had a serious case of COVID-19, and then a couple weeks later had a stroke. So that really fits with what we're seeing in the very new research that's coming out about that. So that could also be considered a non-traumatic brain injury. Any questions or comments about that at this point? You can kind of see in this picture the way this man, the adult in the top picture, has one eye that's drooping, and that could be a sign of a stroke if that is suddenly, comes on. It's new for him. And then you can tell if you look really closely at this little girl, she had cerebral palsy, and that you can tell the tightness in her legs and hips here. So it's probably, she has some damage in her motor cortex, and that's causing her to have abnormally increased muscle tone.
I have a question, Dr. Lancaster.
Yes.
So I don't know if this is related at all to a non-traumatic brain injury, but my dad had an abscess on his brain when I was in college, and it was caused, I think, by, like, he got meningitis, and that caused the brain abscess, and so he was, like, on the neuro floor for, like, 3 months in the hospital. And so I'm kind of wondering, like, is that considered? Where does an abscess fall? Or I don't know.
Yes, that would definitely be
relevant.
A non-traumatic brain injury. Yes. That's another good example. Because and what happened is kind of like I was showing you with my finger. If I take something and, say there's an abscess up under the occipital lobe right here, you see how oh, sorry, that wasn't even on camera. It shifted out because something else is in its place. And so anything around it is being impacted. It's kind of like, if you remember as a kid hearing the story, The Princess and the Pea, when there was just a little dried pea under the princess's mattress, and they kept putting more mattresses on top of it, and she still felt it. So it could be even something really small, like a dried bean, but that still is causing inflammation around it, and it's causing displacement of some brain tissue. And while this occipital lobe is shifting out, that couldn't happen in a real brain because of the skull. So what would happen is it would bump up against the skull, and then it might cause injury to the outside of that lobe because of the skull collision. So yeah, anything that is in the brain that shouldn't be there, whether it's swelling or an abscess or a tumor or a bullet, any of that would be considered a non-traumatic brain injury. It's going to result in some sort of impact on the brain tissue. That's not to say it's not recoverable, because neuroplasticity. So that doesn't mean, the person is going to have those effects long term. The brain is an amazing part. The body is an amazing thing and can adjust to some of those things, as we know. Did that answer your question, Megan? Isn't it funny the way that when that was happening, that term might not ever have been used? They just said abscess or a meningitis or something, but they didn't maybe say non-traumatic brain injury. It may be kind of like Joetta was talking about. Sometimes there's an intentional use of language so as not to alarm people too much, or to push people into classifying things in a way that might be discouraging to them. It also might be that, they just didn't share that with you because you were a kid at the time. So let's look at the consequences of acquired brain injury. So this would be, think back to the chart, this would be whether it was traumatic or non-traumatic. In the acute phase, so that's very soon after the injury happens, or the illness, whichever it is. This would be when the person is having problems with their basic body functions. So it might be their heart rate, their respiration rate, their breathing, their ability to see, just basic things. So they need to be medically stable before they move out of the acute phase. So for a lot of people early in the injury, that really may just be a few days to sometimes a few weeks. In some more severe cases, it can be a few months. And this is when they would be in the neuro ICU. Sometimes they might be moved to an acute neuro floor in the hospital, but they're definitely in an inpatient hospital setting when this is happening. Their vital signs are being monitored. And what they're trying to do medically is just see how the person's brain starts to adapt to whatever's going on there in the brain. So depending on how severe it is and other factors, how much of that brain is involved, if it's something that's kind of resolving, or if it's like a tumor, if it's something that is there and it's going to be there until it's surgically removed or otherwise treated. So the types of challenges that we would see in the acute phase could be, again, very severe. So the person might have to be on a ventilator. They might have to have all of their body functions supported. Think about after like a very severe motor vehicle collision and somebody's got a severe head injury and they might be even life flighted from the accident scene. In this area, usually where they are life flighted to is Regional 1. And they are there in that neuro ICU, or maybe if they start to be a little more stable, they would be on the acute care floor. And so there are OTs that work acute care and see people in this very vulnerable state. And what your job in that phase is going to be is to start with the evaluation. So you might get, depending on the person's abilities, you might give a motor skill test, you might give a cognitive assessment. And sometimes the person is so very injured that you end up just doing range of motion and preserving their skin integrity. So you would work with the nursing staff and the PT to look at positioning, any sort of equipment they might need, sometimes even just simple positioning strategies, such as if someone is unable to move, maybe they're on a ventilator or just very physically impaired in that acute phase, they're probably going to be on their back in the bed. And think about the points in your body that come into contact with the mattress. If you are laying in the bed, and if we think from the top of the body to the bottom, so caudally, starting cephalically and going caudally, then the one thing that comes into contact is your occipital bone on the back of your skull, that bony protuberance. So sometimes you will see pressure sores or decubitus ulcers starting to develop right there. Beyond that, it tends to be the shoulder blades, especially in people who are bonier. Sometimes it is some of the spinal processes, again, depending on how thin or bony somebody is. After that, it will tend to be the ischial tuberosities, those bony protuberances. So you will see that starting to get breakdown, or the sacrum. The other thing that you might not think of, but if you really go in, if you go lay down in the bed and think, what is having the most pressure, the most contact with this mattress, the next thing going down in the body is the heels. And so an example of a really simple but often overlooked positioning strategy is to take a bath towel and roll it up and put it underneath sort of the ankle area, and that makes it where the person's heel is not touching the bed. And you might have the nursing staff do that, or make sure that's being done by family members as you're also showing them range of motion and things like that. So you're really trying to help with medical stability and help keep the person from losing physical abilities, so that when they do start to recover, they aren't dealing with additional challenges. So once that couple a day to couple a week, usually acute phase happens, then the person would be moved to more of a rehab facility if they are still needing intervention. And this can last from several weeks to several months, sometimes even much longer. And sometimes it's at this point when we sometimes realize that some of the effects may be long-term or permanent. Some may not. Depends on a lot of factors, which we kind of already talked about. Research tells us that about 90% of people with even a severe acquired brain injury overcome most of their physical difficulties within the first year. So the vast majority, and that's really good news. Now those 10% who don't, that's people who have a longer term or even lifelong consequences from that brain injury. And also notice the way I said in that statistic that they overcome most of their physical challenges. There are still often social emotional challenges and cognitive challenges that we see that happen on a longer term basis with people with that severe brain injury. So sometimes those are more subtle or minor, like executive function problems. Or it might be emotional control. So that frontal lobe filtering, or they may have effects to where they cry more easily or get angry more easily, or they're more impulsive. And especially with that impulsiveness, a term that Joetta used, I want to bring this up now because it applies to what we're talking about here too, is the increased risk for secondary brain injuries. So think about it, if somebody has an initial brain injury and their frontal lobe is affected, so they are having problems with impulse control, it makes sense that they are then at higher risk to do something impulsively and risky that makes them end up with a secondary brain injury. One of the first kids that I worked with at Le Bonheur when I was a new OT practitioner working on that neuro floor was a kid named CJ, who then was 6 years old, and he had been in a car accident. He was a passenger in a car that was hit from the side, or T-boned, as we say, by another vehicle, and he had a traumatic brain injury. He was in a coma for about a month, and then was gradually emerged from that, but he was there with us in the hospital on the long-term neuro floor for probably 4 months. And then even after that, he had a recovery period that lasted quite a while. And so after about a year, what we noticed, because we would bring the kids back to the hospital quarterly and we would do testing to see how their long-term recovery was going. And kind of ironically, several years after CJ's injury, when I started working for the school system, one of the schools I was assigned to happened to be CJ's school. So I then got him as a patient again. He was on my student caseload and was still having some cognitive challenges. He was really fine physically, but had some impulse control that would make him like blurt out things that he wasn't supposed to. So he was getting in trouble, had some things that were coming out as behavior and some attention problems and focus and just higher order thinking problems. And there was a time when he was playing in his driveway at a period after that, and he was playing with a ball and it rolled into the street and he went after it without looking, and he then was hit by a car. So it was related to that impulse control. So he actually had a second brain injury, and the tissue that had already been damaged was damaged again, and that makes it harder for the brain to adapt. So he had some longer term, a greater degree of long-term deficits that second time. So long-term effects can be subtle to severe. In later stages, like what I talked about with CJ, we often think of the residual deficits as a hidden disability, and that just means they may not be visible to the naked eye, to people that just see that person in their community or in their workplace or even in their home. They just see them for a while doing something, and they don't realize that it's a change for them, or that the person is having to be prompted, or that they're doing things inefficiently or ineffectively because of problems with social, emotional, and cognitive issues. So if you watched Sean Phipps's TED Talk, you heard him talk about the CAPE model. It's one that is used often in rehab after a traumatic brain injury or non-traumatic brain injury. And really what it's talking about is that the brain responds the best in rehab or in the recovery after an acquired brain injury to continuous and incrementally increased challenges over time. And that's how we spur neuroplasticity. Again, it relates to what we know in OT is the just right challenge. If we continue to challenge the person with a brain injury in a just right way, so we don't want to give them something that's not hard enough or something that's way too hard. We want to have them have to act to respond, so not be passive in what they're doing. We know that it often takes many, many sessions or practice sessions of repetition for someone to learn or relearn after a brain injury. And we want to continuously keep track of their progress and where they are over time with that, so we can track the changes. All right, here's a short video.
I thought I was on top of the world.
By all accounts, Jermaine Hickey was on the fast track. In 2010, he was barely out of college and already a homeowner, climbing the corporate ladder as a financial planner.
I'm like the financial doctor, anything and everything financial.
But something happened one night on his way home from an outing with friends.
I'm like crying, like thinking about it. It's crazy.
His car ended up in a ditch.
And completely wrecked my car. Smashed, collided the front of it. I mean, it was all gone.
Most of the night is still a blur.
I was in a coma for a week.
What Jermaine remembers is waking up at a manual rehabilitation center. He had suffered a severe brain injury.
I had to be retaught how to walk, how to talk, how to pick up a spoon, I couldn't go to the bathroom with my own.
Pretty humbling for a guy used to the fast lane.
I was what they call anxious. I wanted things now.
Now patience, and a team of highly skilled speech, occupational, and physical therapists would be his guide. They had a plan to get Jermaine back to his old life.
And they're saying, hey, Jermaine, we're re-teaching you how to count. Because if you showed me an equation and said, hey, Jermaine, what's this 1 and this 2 next to each other and that plus? What does that equal? I wouldn't have been able to tell you.
And it would start with baby steps.
We would work with them every day on simple things that we take for granted, like getting dressed, brushing your teeth, just getting your clothes out of the closet, little things like that.
Because Jermaine suffered a head injury, he was assigned a brain specialist, Carly Mormon, to help him with his unique challenges.
A lot of us have gone on to get certification so that we're specializing in the brain injury. And just that continuing education that we get year after year just really helps us to help people like Jermaine get from right after their accident back into their normal everyday lives that they want.
And Jermaine is back.
Not everyone can make a big recovery like that. He was just very determined and very motivated to get there.
And in great shape before the accident. Jermaine was a star football player in college. He played for Iowa State. His therapists believe that went a long way in getting him back on his feet.
I had this desire and this hunger, but it didn't come easy.
So after months of therapy, Jermaine got his old life back. The life he wanted, not the life he was living.
So at the end of the day, it's not all about me. I've gone from number 1 on my priority list to, I may not be in my top 10 right now. But
The quality of care you receive after an injury or illness can determine your quality of life. At a manual rehabilitation center, they offer more than physical, occupational, and speech therapy. They restore hope, one patient at a time, to people ready to get on with their life. If you would like more information on the services available at a manual rehabilitation center, call 1-800-ALLEGIANT or go to allegiantcreighton.com.
All right. So that's, we learn through stories. So that was a story that I wanted to share. And now let's play a Kahoot. All right. Let's see here. All right, here we go. So loud. 3 4 3 3 7 4 8. An example of some types of acquired brain injuries that would result in this specific damage to areas might be a stroke. So if you have a stroke, if somebody has a stroke and it's a blood clot or a bleed that happens in a certain lobe, or sometimes it's a 2 or 3 lobes of their brain, that's going to, and we know that from the CAT scan or the MRI, we're going to know more what to expect clinically or functionally with that person. And so a brain tumor, an abscess that's in a certain area of the brain. If we know that it's a kind of stroke that's not a bleed, but that it's been because of an occlusion, that means there's like a traffic jam it's in that area of the brain. We would know that. If it is a gunshot wound and we know that it went through, say, sideways through the frontal lobe or the parietal lobe or the occipital lobe, that could be something else that would let us predict that. If it is a struck by or against injury, that's a little bit of an in-between area for specific versus global damage. If, say, like the kid that I was talking about that was being chased and struck her head against the concrete pillar, well, the main injury, the main area that she sustained injury to was her frontal lobe. But if you think about what happened, so she struck it against, let's get my brain here. She struck it against the frontal lobe, but then that shifted the brain backwards and the back of her brain hit her skull. So there's that secondary coup contra coup kind of injury. So she did also have some more diffuse areas of injury, but primarily it was her frontal lobe. And that would be similar in a car accident too. So those are just examples of some of the ways that in an acquired brain injury, you might have specific parts of the brain that are damaged that help us to predict what the deficits or challenges are going to be. Now, in things like DAI or in more of an infection or diffuse injury to the brain, then we're like a really large brain bleed or an anoxic injury, like that happens in a near drowning, then that would be more global, and those it's harder to predict what's going to happen there. When there is damage to the cerebral cortex, so that's these 4 lobes here, not the brainstem, but the rest of the main lobes that we know are in the brain, you are going to often see aphasia, which you know is difficulty understanding and or producing language. You see this a lot in strokes, but also other types of acquired brain injuries as well. And what type of aphasia it really is related to where exactly in the cerebral cortex you might see the damage to. So let's do a little review of Broca's versus Wernicke's aphasia. I'm probably going to have to. There we go.
Broca's aphasia is a communication disorder that affects a person's ability to speak and write. It's also called non-fluent aphasia. It comes on suddenly, the result of a brain injury or stroke. People with Broca's aphasia may understand everything said to them, but they have difficulty finding words to express themselves or answer questions. Sometimes they're only able to speak in short phrases, or 1 or 2 words at a time. People with Broca's aphasia know that they're speaking haltingly, and they are aware that speech takes effort. This leads to a lot of frustration. They know what they want to say, but they're unable to say it. Broca's aphasia can improve over time, especially with professional speech therapy. So how do you best communicate with someone experiencing Broca's aphasia? Ask 1 question at a time, be patient, and give the person time to find their words. Encourage the person to use all forms of communication, including switching to a different word, body language, and gestures. Also, acknowledge their frustration. The National Aphasia Association can help you learn more about diagnosing and managing Broca's aphasia. Go to aphasia.org for more information and resources.
All right, so that's Broca's aphasia, and you can see in this drawing where that is different. So that'd be where the brain damage is specifically different from where it would be in Wernicke's aphasia, that's further back. So this is about a little clip about Wernicke's aphasia.
Wernicke's aphasia is a communication disorder that affects a person's ability to understand words. It comes on suddenly, the result of a brain injury or stroke. People with Wernicke's aphasia can speak easily, but the words don't always make sense. Their understanding of speech is impaired, so their answers may not match the question. People with Wernicke's aphasia may not know that they're adding non-existent words into their sentences, and may grow confused when other people don't understand them. It is very difficult for them to follow a conversation or comprehend language, written or spoken. Wernicke's aphasia, like all forms of aphasia, is treated with speech therapy. If you're speaking with someone who has Wernicke's aphasia, pay attention to your surroundings and try to figure out meaning from contextual clues. Slow the pace of your speech and give information in chunks. Use gestures or pictures if possible. Repeat and rephrase information, pausing to make sure your words are understood. Most of all, be patient and keep the conversation direct and easy to follow. The National Aphasia Association can help you learn more about diagnosing and managing Wernicke's aphasia.
All right, so both of those little video clips and then a lot of other really helpful information about aphasia is available at aphasia.org. So if you are wanting to learn more about that, you could use something on that website for a NeuroNote if you want. The history on Broca's and Wernicke's aphasias and those areas in the brain that you see in that drawing are that they were named after two neurologists back in the 19th century, Paul Broca and Carl Wernicke. I always think that's funny whenever I talk about that, because I think how I wouldn't be able to think about anything else if I met somebody with either of those two last names right now. If somebody introduced themselves to me as, you know, Bob Wernicke, I would just keep thinking about Wernicke's aphasia right now. But that's how those two types of aphasia got their names, is those two gentlemen were studying those specifically. So you could talk about Broca's as being motor or expressive aphasia. And the damage really is to the front portion of the left-hand side of the brain. So you can notice where the brain stem is there, closer to Wernicke's aphasia, and that's the back of the head, as you know. Oftentimes, Broca's aphasia is accompanied by right-sided weakness or paralysis because it's on the left side of the brain, and we know that that works in a contralateral way. Whatever side the damage is on, we're seeing effects on the other side of the body, function-wise. So and I'll say to that, sometimes it's confusing if you hear somebody talking about someone who's had a stroke and they say they've had a left stroke or a right stroke. I hear this pretty often from people who don't really understand clinical terms. In fact, I know someone who just recently had a left stroke, as she told it to me later. And so it was confusing to me as to whether she had a stroke on the left side of her brain or if the effects from the stroke that she was having were on the left side of her body, right? But she didn't understand so I was asking, was it something that happened to the left side of your brain? And it took me a lot of questioning to get to the bottom of that. And sometimes even if you ask a bunch of questions, they don't really know because they didn't pick it up, or maybe it wasn't explained to them in a way they could understand that distinction. So when you are looking at a patient's chart and before you evaluate them or as part of that evaluation, especially if they or their caregiver have just reported to you, I had a left stroke, you have to really go back and look at the clinical report of the MRI or what the physician has written to see if it was on the left side that the stroke was, or if they're having effects on the left side of their body, meaning that the stroke was on their right side. And the reason you might want to do that, even though you can look and see, you know, how their motor skills are playing out, is because it's much more likely to be an aphasia present if the stroke occurred on the left side of their brain. So Wernicke's aphasia, again, is sometimes called sensory or receptive aphasia, and it's taking in that language or information that's more challenging there. It is often associated with damage to the left temporal cortex, so that kind of more towards the back, as you can see in that drawing. And interestingly, oftentimes when somebody has Wernicke's aphasia, they don't have any weakness in their body because it's further from the motor cortex is why. Okay, so let's talk about the frontal lobe.
Dr. Lancaster?
Yes, please chime in.
Real quick. Okay, so do we need to know, so Wernicke's aphasia, do we need to know that that is specifically, you said the temporal cortex? Do we need to be that specific, or do we need to just know that's like related to the cerebral cortex?
Don't worry about where that is. That really, where those two things are. I'm not going to ask you which one is further to the front, which one is further to what you.
So we don't really relate those with the lobes.
Right.
Well,
but you know that they are more related to a stroke on the left side of the brain.
Okay, so like left or right.
Yes,
okay.
You might need to know that is you might get the diagnosis, you know, stroke on left side in the chart, but they don't say anything about aphasia. And you need to be prepared when you then meet the client that there might be some aphasia present. That makes sense. Let's think about, when we think about what our long-term need to know is going to be, it's going to be more about functional challenges that you see. All right, definitely chime in if you think of anything else. Any other questions here? We'll fix that. Okay, frontal lobe, the good old frontal lobe. We've already talked about that a little bit in this session, and we talked about it for sure in neurobiology. It is your higher order type of impulse control, executive function. Some people say that's where a lot of your personality comes from. It plays a role, though, in some motor function, but more in problem solving, memory, judgment. When you think frontal lobe, I really want you to think impulse control, judgment, behavior. So if somebody has damage in that area, they are really going to have some behavior changes. That's the area that you might see somebody who has never said a bad word in their life might start talking in a way that would make a sailor blush.
Dr. Lancaster?
Yes.
Another question, because on that slide, you go like into a little more detail about like in your notes underneath, like the left frontal lobe and the right frontal lobe.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as the lobes, the areas of the brain and the impairment from damage, do we need to be specific and know what's the left and what's the right of that lobe?
No, don't worry about that. Worry about when you think frontal lobe, think impulse control, judgment, safety problems, you know, that sort of thing, in behavior. So you might see cussing, you might see them doing things that are sort of sexual in nature, like somebody has a frontal lobe injury, They might grab a nurse's butt when she goes by, or make a comment about somebody like looking good in that nurse's outfit, you know, inappropriate things like that, that they never would have done otherwise. So very big personality changes that you might see. Again, it makes sense. It's right there out in front. It is very susceptible to injury, more so than other parts of the brain because it's of where it is. It is the most common specific region in a mild and moderate traumatic brain injury for that exact reason there. Okay, so let's talk again about this term that is coup contra coup. The coup is where they get that primary impact. So look at that picture, and I think you'll probably always remember that term from a baseball bat striking somebody right in the head. You know, it's a big rule in baseball and softball, if you've ever played or spent much time around the field where those sports are being played, that when a player gets a walk, so when they have, you know, had 4 balls thrown to them for bad pitches, we'll say, by the pitcher, then the referee or umpire will say, you get to walk to first base. And just a minute, Bessie. So they are not allowed to throw the bat. If they do, it is a big penalty for them and their team. And the reason is what you're seeing in that picture right there. If they throw the bat, they may hit the catcher that's standing right there, smack in the head. And so the coup is where they are struck. The contra coup is the strike on the back side of their brain. Let me let my dog out 1 second. She's going to keep barking until I do. Okay, so that would be the same in other injuries besides being hit by a bat. But the kid that was running and hit her head on the concrete pillar, if someone is kicked in the head, a football injury, a soccer injury, you know, lots of sports injuries could turn out like that, but also a motor vehicle crash or, you know, or a fall could result in that. So look at the back and forth that happen in that picture on the right-hand side. So a coup contra coup is an injury that happens often to the brain when something that is moving strikes something that is not moving. So it's a back and forth injury. So like I showed you on this, here we go. The frontal lobe is impacted first, and then that makes the brain go back and it hits sometimes something behind it, but for sure it's going to hit the back of the skull. So and then sometimes that'll propel it forward again, then backward again. So you got your back and forth injury. Think about shaking something up in a cup or the egg in the shell. And so that is like a 1-2 punch. Yes.
Is that not called a contusion?
Well, contusion is just a medical term for a bruise.
Oh, okay. I was thinking of like there's a word that when your brain hits your skull, I thought it was contusion for a second. Well, how is
it? Could be the initial impact could be like a bruised brain. You can kind of see the colored in area right by the bat. That's a contusion. It just means there was a bleed there, so it ended up being like a bruise to the brain, but that is a brain injury. So that it would be really that if you're talking about a contusion, it would be like 2 contusions. So see how there's that colored in area in the front of the brain, and that pushes the brain backwards, and then it hits the back of the skull, and there's that second contusion right there and right there. So yes, it could be a contusion, but it's that's part of a coup contra coup injury. That makes sense? If it goes back and forth enough, like you see in this right hand, you know, and this is our physics come into play here. If the difference in how fast the person or the brain was moving, and then the impact of the stationary object, if there's enough force involved that it makes the brain go back and forth repeatedly, so there's a mini coup contra coup, you could keep saying those two words over and over, then it can result in a DAI, just like shaken baby syndrome. So it doesn't always, it might just be hit to the front and a hit to the back, but many times it does. So know there that what a coup contra coup is, the kinds of things that might cause that, like sports injuries, a motor vehicle accident, a fall, violence. If it is like someone getting punched in the front of their head, then there's a moving object that hits a stationary object and causes a back and forth series of injuries. That can result in diffuse axonal shearing. All right, so what does damage to the frontal lobe end up looking like specifically? Difficulty sequencing. So you might see somebody trying to do the second, third, fourth step of something before they do the first step of it. You might see them doing something strange, like putting their shoe on and then putting their sock on. So that would be, you know, out of sequence. They might use conditioner in their hair before they use shampoo. You know, something that is out of sequence in their ADLs, IADLs, you know, anything that they're doing. Another term that you might hear is perseveration. That means doing something repeatedly that there's not a reason to do it repeatedly for. So that might be something like saying the same word over and over, or from a motor standpoint, doing the same thing over and over, and there's not a reason for it. They sort of get caught in a loop of doing it. And it's not like a OCD thing of checking the doors locked. It might just be opening the oven, but they're doing it repeatedly. Usually when you hear that term, it's talking about something from a language standpoint. So somebody might have like a little phrase that they put in all the time in their language. I'll tell you a story about a kid that I worked with at Le Bonheur, another of the first kids that I worked with a severe brain injury early in my career. This kid's name was Freddie. And what he did that was motor and language perseveration, when he was in a coma for several weeks and then started emerging from that. And he perseverated by using his hand sort of like a puppet, but there wasn't a puppet there. And he would say, what was his phrase? As a something. So he would say, like, you know, like there are a lot of phrases that are like running around like a chicken with your head cut off, or crazy as the day is long, or, you know, that kind of thing. And he would use that as to communicate. So I would say, like, hey, Freddie, are you ready to go to the rehab gym? And he would say, easy come, easy go, crazy as the day is long, but he would make his like hand puppet say it. And he did that all the time. And that's the way he would communicate. He didn't, you know, whenever he was saying something, he did it with his hand, and he would put in some kind of a weird phrase there. Yes, kind of like the kid on The Shining. Yes. It was a very strange thing, and it went on for weeks, and the rehab team and his parents were very concerned that it might never go away. But after several weeks, and we would say, I want to hear from you, not your hand, and just, try to kind of put in a little bit of therapeutic humor and without nagging him. Or, his parents even said, well, what if we tie his hands down? But we didn't want to do that. We were a little curious as to would he talk without his hand if he couldn't use his hand. But I noticed that when he was doing things like we would be putting marbles in holes or doing a craft in OT, and he would stop what he was doing with his hands and say it with his hand if he needed to tell me something. So after a few weeks, he gradually stopped doing it. It didn't happen overnight, but he started just talking without using his pretend hand puppet. But that's what perseveration can look like. I've worked with an adult with a traumatic brain injury who her perseveration was to say, don't you know? You could tell that's kind of a northern phrase, and she would say it in her like Boston accent. Everything she said, she would end it with, don't you know? And so we just kind of overlooked that, and gradually she stopped saying that. You will see a lot of attention problems, social behaviors that are concerning to people, like the sexual innuendos that I talked about, or sometimes it's like they've just completely lost their filter. So they will say things like, well, I don't like such and such because they have a big nose. Or, they were nasty to me that one time, so they're just nasty. Or, I don't want to talk to her because she probably doesn't have much money, or I don't think she's very smart. And so you have to, part of the goal for the rehab team then becomes learning what to say and learning what not to say. And it's kind of like when you work in a preschool classroom, or when, if you have a little kid around, you'll say things like, sometimes we think it and we don't say it, but you might have to even reteach that to an adult. Use visual cues for that. You go through role play and rehearsing for that, for sure. Difficulty with problem solving. And there's a technique that you can use in intervention it sounds mean, but it's an intentional technique that's called sabotage. And what that means is you set up the environment, or you come up with a task that it has a specific problem in it. And then you observe or prompt the client through the problem solving process. So here's an example of that. You might have a client and they're going to eat their meal, but you intentionally set it up so that there isn't a utensil on the tray or the table. And so there's something that they need for that isn't there. And you watch and see how they go through that problem solving. I've seen clients that will sometimes, maybe they have a plate of macaroni and cheese, but there's no utensil at all. And so sometimes they will pick up the plate, bring it up to their mouth and just start eating it. Sometimes they'll pick up a noodle and use their hand like that. I have seen someone that will just sit there and not eat. And because they maybe can't find the words to ask for a utensil, or they just can't figure out what to do. What do you do if what you go to get to feed yourself isn't there? So then, we'll let them sit there for a while and then say, is there something that you need? And they might say, I don't know, or yes. And then you say, well, did you want to ask me for that? Or did you want to get up and go look for that? I've done this in working with a small group of kids that have a history of brain injury, where I'll have them do something like maybe it's eating a little snack or doing a craft, but I'll intentionally make it where they're going to need to throw something away at some point during that activity, but I'll make it where there's no trash can in the room. And it's really fascinating to see. Some of the kids will get up and they'll go to where the trash can normally is, You can almost see the wheels spinning. Sometimes they'll just put the trash on the floor where the trash can would be, usually. Sometimes they'll put the trash in their pocket because they don't know what else to do with it, or they'll just go sit back down with the trash and just put it on the table beside them. And of course, what I want them to do is to either look for the trash can or tell me that they don't know where the trash can is, you know, something that you would typically do if you need to throw something away and there's no garbage can. So that's kind of how we start to address problem solving. Loss of spontaneity sort of goes along with that, figuring out what to do in the spur of the moment if it isn't your normal routine. Poor initiation of voluntary movement. So sometimes that comes along with a frontal lobe injury, and it really relates back to their problem solving more so than the motor planning part of it. But there is a motor component of it, and part of what we see, we can test by doing a rapid alternating movement motor screening. So you can have them, we talked about this in neurobiology, hold your hands out like you're holding a tray and then flip them over like you're dumping something out. And then flip them palms up, palms down, palms up, palms down, and you have them do that over and over. And you'll often see them where one side may lag, or maybe they just can't figure out how to do it at all. And so they'll end up doing, you know, it'll look very uncoordinated, or they'll just not understand you, so they won't get started with it. Another way to screen for rapid alternating movement is to have them touch each fingertip to the pad of their thumb, go back and forth, and do both hands together, and then see if you can do that faster. And you will see them really struggle with this because it's really a pretty coordinated movement that you'll see. So that the inability to do that rapid alternating movement is called dysdiadochokinesia. And it's a form of ataxia. Next lobe that we're going to talk about is the parietal lobe. So it's a little further back than the frontal lobe. It's the maroon thing in this picture, though it's not maroon in real life. It's a little further back and superior still. And we know that parietal lobe has a lot to do with your perception. Also your visual attention, and also it's there, you know, that motor cortex is kind of in between the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe and runs down into that temporal lobe. So motor coordination and ability to manipulate, especially little things, comes into play. So it's sensation and perception. Damage to the parietal lobe can result in difficulty naming objects. So it could be your perception of your sensation. Problems naming objects is anomia, lack of naming, what that means. Similar to the frontal lobe, it's a inability to focus your attention. So somebody can see very scatterbrained. Problems with motor planning, also related to the frontal lobe, and that's because that motor cortex is right there in between. So we do see apraxia with damage to the parietal lobe. A big one that you'll really notice in, I think probably everybody with the damage to the parietal lobe, is impaired spatial orientation and problems putting things together, like constructionally. So that would be constructional apraxia. If you give somebody a puzzle or a box of Legos and say, okay, build a house with that. Or here's a picture of something that I've built with Legos. I want you to build that same thing. They will have a super hard time with that. Damage to the left parietal lobe can result in, don't worry about the Gerstmann syndrome. That term's not used too commonly, But what I do want you to know is what problems with writing, handwriting is, agraphia, and doing math calculations, acalculia. And in the video we watched about, I think the guy's name was Jermaine, a little while ago, he talked about that. Even somebody who was very good at mental math might have trouble adding 2 plus 3 earlier in a brain injury, or if that injury to the parietal lobe persists. Inability to distinguish the fingers on the hand. So especially without looking, if I say, okay, don't look, so look up, but now I want you to stick out just your pinky finger or just your index finger, and they have difficulty doing that. So it's the motor planning from the perception of and the sensation there. When you have somebody with left neglect, we talked about last session, that often is from a parietal lobe injury on the right side. So again, it's a contralateral, but parietal lobe, and so it results in problems with perception and sensation on the left side of the body. And the other thing that you see, and this sometimes is frontal lobe damage too, but it can be parietal lobe damage, is a denial or lack of awareness that they have problems. And so that's called anosognosia. All those different things. And we know that with apraxia, there are many kinds of apraxia. Constructional is one of them, building something, the motor planning that's needed. And make sure you are clear on ideomotor and ideational apraxia, and go back and watch those OT Miri videos again if you're not clear on those. But those things are all associated with the parietal lobe damage. Any questions or comments about parietal lobe deficits? Okay, some of this, yeah, go ahead.
So as far as the denial of deficits, how do you say that word?
Anosognosia.
Anosognosia. You said that's both for the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe?
Yes, and the reason really can be because frontal lobe is reasoning, judgment, safety, and parietal lobe is more your perception or taking things in from the environment and then interpreting those. So processing, perception, sensation. And so those both kind of go along with that recognition of your own limitations. Next is temporal lobe. And so this is a little further down caudally. So it's kind of tucked in underneath the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe. It's more above your ear. I know someone who had a TIA, a transient ischemic attack, recently, and the way she said that the neurologist explained it to her was that her mini stroke, which is what sometimes people call a TIA, her mini stroke happened over her left ear. That's what, and so she was asking me, would it affect her hearing? And it really was just, it was the way that it was explained to her. So these are some of the issues that you might see when there is damage to the temporal lobe. And let me let my dog back in. I'll let y'all take that in a second. Like having a little kid in my house. Okay, so damage to the temporal lobe. This is where we might see some of the Wernicke's aphasia. we might see disturbance of attention again, categorization. That's more important to know that you might see that. So problems with identifying and putting things in categories. So I mentioned this in the last lecture, but an example of this would be like if I gave you a big basket of laundry and said, okay, fold this according to how you would put it away in your drawers. And so then you have to think what is alike and why would that go together? Like a jacket and a shirt, would you put that in the same drawer? Or socks and underwear, would you put that in the same drawer or different drawer, and why? So that would be how people might categorize things. Or if I had a whole box of food and I said, sort this, you have to figure out how you would sort it, what the categories even would be. Recognizing faces, prosopagnosia. And so you might have heard the story of the man who, I'm trying to remember the name of it, who saw faces as hats. And so he really couldn't recognize even people he knew well. He could not recognize them by their face. He needed them to talk, or sometimes he could do it according to their body language. Problems with memory, lots of talking, and increased aggressiveness. So I would say when you think about the temporal lobe, let's kind of think in a nutshell. One thing, it is associated with your hearing, definitely your categorization of objects. So let's think about that hat, because the hat comes down right about where the occipital lobe is. So you might think categorization. If I gave you a whole bunch of different hats and said, put these in piles by category. Some of them are winter hats. Some of them are Easter hats or Kentucky Derby hats. Some of them are baseball caps, whatever. Some of them are what you would wear to some other event, so you might categorize. So think about that temporal lobe categorization and hearing. And then the other thing is, if you're trying to remember something, you might go like this, and so that's right by that temporal lobe also. And it also is associated with your ability to think about the concept of time. What time is it in the day? So that's also with your memory. So remember those big things when you think temporal lobe. Categorization and hearing and memory. Occipital lobe is next, and it's back by that occipital protuberance in the back of your head. So it's very posterior. It is not as vulnerable to injury because it's kind of tucked underneath. Though if you have a coup contra coup injury, you will see some damage to the occipital lobe. So that is more your visual spatial processing. Looking at what you see and what you think you see. So sometimes when there is damage to the occipital lobe, you might have, somebody might have hallucinations, or things they see look distorted, kind of like a funhouse mirror. Or, there's that little warning on your side mirrors in your car, things that may appear larger or closer than they actually are. And that's kind of how it is with the occipital lobe. So remember vision problems and distortions there. Difficulty identifying colors, which I think is really interesting that it comes from that part. Locating objects. So if I, said, oh, here's a cup of writing implements, I want you to pick out the pencils out of there. That visual scanning is difficult when you have an occipital lobe injury. So remember, visual perception, vision, and that's what we see problems with. And of course, difficulty reading and writing there. All right, last one that we're going to talk about as far as like a big area of the brain and what that effect is the cerebellum. We talked about this one a good bit in neurobiology. It's tucked down underneath that occipital lobe and the temporal lobe at your temple. So it's down under that, but before the brainstem. So when you think cerebellum, I want you to think coordination. 2 long C words there. That's how I remember it. And so it's associated with your voluntary motor movement and your balance and even your muscle tone. And damage to the cerebellum is going to look like incoordination. That's the thing that if you have something going on in your cerebellum, the person often appears like they are intoxicated. If you put them through that DUI test that you see them doing, walking a straight line, toe to toe, doing this kind of thing, they're not going to be able to do it. So they may be able to walk, but it's going to look really uncoordinated. If you test them with that rapid alternating test that we talked about a minute ago, that is really associated there with what we talked about in the parietal lobe, you're going to also see that in the cerebellum. Whoops, there it is. So you'll see that dys or adiadochokinesis, a lack of ability or problem in doing rapid alternating movements, however you're testing that. Coordination of eye movements, you may see that their eyes are crossed or they just can't track well. If you have them, that's like the test. It's another DUI test where they'll say, don't move your head, but follow my flashlight with your eyes or my pen with your eyes. You may see tremors. They may feel dizzy. The speech slurring wouldn't be because of an expressive coordination problem. It would be because of motor coordination. So when you think cerebellum, think coordination, and remember that the person may appear really clumsy or even intoxicated. And that is the end of today's lecture. We're going to stop there at slide 31. And this is where we will start. Let me look at our, when we meet on Friday, this is what we'll talk about. We'll keep talking about specific areas of the brain and specific types of brain injury, and then we'll go forward from that and start talking about what recovery looks like and some testing and intervention from there. Okay, so here's the first question I'm going to ask you on Friday. What is missing from these 2 squares? So make sure you know that. These are very common causes of each of these kinds. So that's something I'm going to ask you. I'm also going to ask you, what are the ways that brain injuries can be classified, acquired brain injuries. So that'll be some retrieval practice for you. Any questions for me before we close up today's session?
I have a question, but I don't know how specific this is because I know we're doing like interventions in later classes. I was just thinking, I had a client when I worked at Ortho South, and she had like brain surgery. Like I think she had a tumor removed, and it was like near her cerebellum. So she definitely like seemed drunk and like had these issues and had a walker and stuff. So at what time, do you just accept these changes, or like because of neuroplasticity, like are you always trying to improve like these functions?
Really good question. And it doesn't even, it isn't even specific to the exact kind of stroke. Just, after a brain injury or stroke, after an acquired brain injury, when do you know when to say when is kind of what you're asking. And
Yeah.
so here's my answer to that. We'll talk more about this in the next couple of lectures, but my answer to that is it depends on time mainly. So if somebody is a year or less from when the problem started, so when they had the brain injury or the stroke, then you're going to definitely keep trying to rehabilitate it. You're really trying to spur on that neuroplasticity. Like Sean Phipps said, you're going to keep giving them increased challenges incrementally and letting them do lots of practice. But if you notice that there is some paralysis, and if things go on more than a year, you're going, and even in the meantime, if somebody is trying to say tie their shoe, but they can't get the motor planning for it, I would, in therapy, I would continue working on relearning to tie shoes. But in the meantime, if they're just unable to do it, and maybe it's, their caregivers just trying to get them out the door sometimes, I would turn them on to elastic laces or shoes with no laces, introduce them to Vans or something like that, Crocs or whatever. Encourage them to, it's summer, wear flip-flops and give them a pass on that. Say, we're going to keep working on it. But in the meantime, if time is of the essence, and if you're at home, just wear something else for right now. So you might look at a functional kind of middle of the road. If you're more than a year out, you're going to change your frame of reference to more of a compensatory one. And that's when you start, we'll talk about occupational adaptation and that theory and how that really plays into neurological injuries.
Okay.
Right.
That makes sense.
That's a very good question. Know when to say when. And, that's true for kids a lot too. It's not that they have lost an ability. It's that they never learned it. If there's a delay, if they've had a brain injury, maybe they never learned to tie their shoes. So you have to figure out, do you work and work and work to teach them that? Or do you just let them compensate for it? And so the answer really can be maybe some of both, but you don't want to give up on the teaching part too soon.
That makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. I like it when you guys have some experience in the field that relates back to what we're talking about, because I know it helps you understand it and probably shed some light on what you saw in the past and why things might have happened. Okay, so I have on my to-do list today, I'm still going through I'm working my way through your diagnosis snapshots, and those are looking really good. And I also am going to finish that media project information and assignment, and I'll post that, and I'll post an announcement when that's there so you can start thinking about that if you want. You don't necessarily have to, it's not due for a little while. So, all right, that's all for today. Thank you for being here.
Dr. Lancaster, before you, you replied. Awesome. I was making sure you saw the chat.
Yes, I did. Thank you. I think I'm caught up. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Y'all have a good rest of the day. I'll see you on Friday.